just want to spend a couple of minutes thinking about the relationship between language and thought. If that sounds really boring, which I'm sure it does, if you just hang on, I want to tell a story here as well. So once I've done the thinking bit, I'll tell a story which I think relates to it. And it's one of those stories that's got like all the ingredients of a soap opera, you know, it's like love, betrayal, death, racism. It's like Othello, basically. So if you hang on past this first bit, I'll get to the story. But anyway, language and thought. Because there's basically two kinds of theories for explaining the relationship between language and thought, as far as I'm aware. And these are what are sometimes called mould theories, and what are sometimes called cloak theories. Okay, so mould theories first. These are usually associated with a guy called Benjamin Whorf. But lots of work has been done since he started it. Mould theories basically say that language comes first. That we all grow up in language communities, you know, speaking the language of the people around us, our family, our parents, our friends, and that language forms a kind of set of shapes that our mind presses itself into, like plasticine. Do you know what I mean? So our mind is sort of forced into the template that the language provides for us. And that's the idea that's behind things like George Orwell's 1984. You know, if you know that novel, you know that everyone speaks Newspeak, which is this really highly pruned version of the English language, in which all of the words to do with revolution or revolt or anti-governmental feeling or any of that kind of stuff, all those words have been pruned from the language, with the theory being that if a person can't express these ideas, if there's no word for that, then the person can't think those things, yeah? As I said, the logic from that comes from this set of theories, mould theories of language. If you can't express it, you can't think it. Okay, the other set of theories, what I sometimes refer to as cloak theories, just reverse that. They say thought comes first and language follows it. So within cloak theories, you have an idea, a concept emerges in you, which you need to express either to another person or to yourself or to inscribe on paper or whatever. So you find ways of wrapping that thought up, that concept up, in sounds. You know, those sounds eventually become words once a language stabilizes, or something like that. You know, so the concepts come first, and then they're wrapped, cloaked in this dressing of words. So that's the opposite. You probably see how that works, yeah. I mean, most modern theories say that it's neither. It's a bit of a relationship between the two, but for simplicity's sake, it's those. And in one of his books, Steven Pinker is talking about that, and he's basically critiquing mould theories and supporting cloak theories. He's basically saying that concepts come first and then they get dressed up in language in order for them to be expressed. And he gives the example of this word Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is a German word, doesn't exist in the English language. And he says that when you take an English-speaking person, somebody from an English-speaking community, like myself for example, and introduce them to the word Schadenfreude, and you tell them roughly what it means, you say Schadenfreude is a German word, and it means something like to take pleasure in the misfortunes of another person. To take pleasure in the misfortunes of another person. If you explain that to an English-speaking person, they don't say, take pleasure in the misfortunes of another. I can't imagine such a thing. No, and that's what you would expect if mould theories were correct, because they wouldn't have, that mould doesn't exist in the English language, so we shouldn't be able to conceptualise it. But the fact is, we can conceptualise it. And if you say that, Schadenfreude, it means to take pleasure in the misfortunes of another. What people will generally say is, what, you mean the Germans have got word for that? Cool. That's the usual response, which demonstrates that cloak theories are closer to the mark than mould theories. Anyhow, on to the story. In the early 1980s, I was living in a great city actually called Newcastle upon Tyne here in the UK, in the northeast. It's a really nice town if you ever get a chance to go there. I was living there in the early 1980s, and I'd moved up from Blackburn in Lancashire, which is not a very nice city at all. And the reason why I'd moved up there is because my first marriage, I've been married twice, and my first marriage had kind of broken up in this really messy way in Blackburn, you see. So I'd scurried out of town to Newcastle. And as I said, my marriage had broken up, and it was a very messy breakup, and it was a bad marriage to start with in many ways. I don't blame anybody, just these things work out, don't they? I mean, basically, she was my first girlfriend. She was a woman I'd lost my virginity to. We had a baby when I was 19. We got married at 20. I mean, we were both really just kids, you know, and I mean, I was much more immature than she was. So it was pretty much doomed from the start, I think. But we gave it a shot. It didn't work out, and as I say, it got all very, very messy indeed, and I skedaddled up to Newcastle. But I still went back every couple of weeks, actually, to visit my daughter, to visit you. If you ever watch these videos, daughter of mine, you probably don't remember because you were very small at the time. I used to come down to the train every couple of weeks. Now, it was always a little bit awkward because, you know, hand on heart, I still had a lot of feelings for my ex-wife. But as I say, we managed to get through that. And then, as you might imagine, you know, inevitably, my ex-wife started seeing somebody else, you know, which is fair enough, she's a free agent. But it was difficult, you know, because as I say, I did have some feelings for her. And that was always a bit awkward. And this lad she was seeing was, I can understand why she would be attracted to this guy. You know, a lot of people were. He used to drink in the same pub I used to drink in when I was in Blackburn. He was an Irish lad, big Irish Catholic family he came from. Very charismatic, really, really funny. You know, good looking in this kind of rough way. And, you know, just very personable kind of person. You know what I mean? Just very funny and spontaneous. On the other hand, he was also a really, really violent person. You know, he's one of these lads who just likes a fight. And he'd been in trouble quite a bit because of that and other things, I guess. He'd been in and out of prison and reform school and, you know, the whole thing really throughout his life, as indeed had a couple of his brothers. So it was quite difficult in that regard. It was terrifying going for a drink with him, actually, because I went for a drink with him a few times when, you know, obviously before all this took place. And you know, you could guarantee after a couple of pints he would find someone to start an argument with, which would result in a fight every week, you know, without fail. So that was always a bit tricky. And he was also, along with a lot of other people around that time I knew, he was very, very racist. I think he was either a member of the National Front or the BNP, something like that. But he was very racist. A lot of the people around him, his brothers, were very racist. And this really simple, casual way, actually, was quite bizarre. And there is a lot of that kind of racism in Blackburn still to this day. In fact, Kingsley Reid, who I think was either the local organiser of the NF or the BNP, was a neighbour of mine. I didn't know him, but he just lived down the street from where I used to live. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. So that, anyway, she was friendly with this guy, and I can understand why, as I say, but that made it even more awkward going down there, because I don't know, it's just a bit hard work, you know what I mean? Anyhow, that proceeded, and time went on, and after a while it got a little bit easier. I found a girlfriend up in Newcastle, and that was great, you know, and I started establishing a life for myself up there, so it started to get a little bit easier. And this brought us around to about 1984, so it's about 1984 by now, speaking of George Orwell. But what happened in 1984, a number of things happened, but one of the things that happened is that there was this massive drought and famine in Africa, which is in all the papers, really big, you know, just lots and lots of pictures of kids dying. It was just awful, really awful. And people are saying, oh, something should be done, something should be done. And two musicians, Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, got together and organised a charity single. It was the first, I think, big charity single. You know, they got a lot of musicians together to make a record, and they sold it, and all the proceeds went to charity. So it's people like Sting and Bono, Boy George, George Michael, I think Bananarama, a lot of other people who are no longer famous, were on this single. Do They Know It's Christmas, or something like that. Yeah, Do They Know It's Christmas? Feed the World, something like that was called. That was the sentiment. I guess it was a Christmas single, and it sold, you know, millions and millions. It was in the charts forever. You couldn't get away from it. Everyone was sick to death of it, but it was, you know, it's for a good cause. So that was very popular. And then kind of following up on the success of the single, again, I think Bob Geldof and maybe Midge Ure were involved in this, is they set up this live gig called Live Aid. The first Live Aid, I think there's been another one since, 20 years later or something. This is the first Live Aid, and I think it was at Wembley Stadium, down in London. And again, it was an all-day thing. It was all the big bands on. It was a fantastic gig, you know. And I watched it in a pub in Newcastle. Actually, it was fantastic with my friend Sandy. But the gig itself was really great. And what I found out was that my ex-wife's boyfriend was going to go to this gig along with one of his brothers and his friend. Now, of course, it's a bit ironic because, as I say, they were all a bunch of complete racists. So the idea of going to this concert in aid of starving Africans was a bit strange. But of course, you know, it was just to see the music. So they all wanted to go. They all got the tickets to go down there, and off they went on this typical Lancashire rainy, miserable day. But off they went, and it was all fine. You know, it was down the M6. It's pretty easy to drive down there, as I know to my cost. I've done it thousands of times now. And all was fine until they got to just past Birmingham. And just past Birmingham, the motorway system gets a bit more complex. You know, you've got the M40, you've got the M5 coming off, the M40, M42, M1, and it is a bit tricky. I think they were heading for either the M40, M1 interchange or M42, M1, one of those interchanges where there's lots of traffic, 4 lanes, it's going off in all directions, and they're in completely the wrong lane. And the lad who was driving, who was my ex-wife's boyfriend's friend, if you can follow that, he was driving, he was in the near side lane over that lane there, but he needed to be on the outside lane to take that road off. And he was, I don't know, maybe he had some kind of flash of inspiration or something, but they were right up on the intersection and he thought he could get across, so he basically just swerved across 4 lines of traffic to try to get to the outside lane. But when he did that, unfortunately, with the road being a little bit slick from this rain they'd had early that morning, the tyres lost traction on the road and the car went into a skid and went right across the road. Didn't make the bend, of course, and so ploughed into a bridge support at about 85 miles an hour. Now, it could have been a lot worse, actually. I mean, they were very lucky in a way, because the lad who was driving, who, as I say, was my ex-wife's boyfriend's friend, he was driving. I think he had a seatbelt on, but he went forward into the steering wheel, so I think he broke his nose. I think he got some cracked ribs, either from the steering wheel or probably just from the seatbelt. So he's got a lot of that kind of stuff, but that's, you know, that mended. And my ex-wife's boyfriend's brother, who was in the passenger seat here, he broke his wrist. I think he must have been trying to stop himself by putting his hands on the dashboard, you know. So he got both his wrists broken. I think he also banged his head, so I guess his head came forward and banged the dashboard. But my ex-wife's boyfriend, who was in the back, didn't have a seatbelt on because he's in the back seat and didn't have to have seatbelts in the backseat of cars in those days. So when it hit the bridge support, he just flew forward between the seats, went through the windscreen, and just basically just kept going, and died at the scene. Unfortunately, died at the scene. It's a shame, isn't it? And that's Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude.